Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. Hope you're getting ready for a great weekend. We are as well. Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic for me continues tonight. Barron Stadium in Rome. Going to be at Mercedes-Benz Stadium tomorrow. A quartet of games. I'm lucky enough to broadcast the final two with my good friend Rusty Manziel. And tomorrow I'll be with you on Atlanta News First. That's WANF, Channel 46 here in Atlanta. So that is a lot of fun. And we are certainly excited about all of that. For now, though, let's jump into the chat here, find out what's going on with you here today. As I said before, hope you've got great weekend plans and just all kinds of fun stuff. Only a couple of weeks away from having Georgia football back in our lives. So in some form or fashion, I'm guessing that some of you are trying to make the most you can of sort of your non-football time of year. And if that's what you're doing, well, I think that's a pretty good thing to be able to do too. So Randy Hall mentioning that Brock Bowers, Herschel Walker made the all-time Associated Press All-American team. I guess, Champ Bailey was on there too, is that right? I did see some of that, yeah. Bill Camacho, who is a Rome guy, looking forward to watching us tonight. Rome Creekside, yeah, terrific game. You know, a couple of the top-ranked teams in their classification in Georgia. That's going to be a ton of fun. So, Bill, I'm looking forward to that there too. Appreciate that. Matt Rugavina on the subject last night of Buford in its first game in its $60+ million stadium. Broke the long winning streak for Milton. It was a good game. I guess Milton has a quarterback injury. You know, their quarterback moves in from St. Thomas Aquinas. We talked to Terrence Edwards about that yesterday. So he moves in. Sounds like he got hurt during the game. Milton still tried to mount a comeback after Buford had a lead. The backup freshman quarterback comes in, who in a place like Milton you would assume is eventually going to be a very good player too. I think he threw a touchdown pass earlier in the game. I didn't see the entire game, but I did see him throw an interception late, which sealed the win for Buford. Obviously, you know how bad they would have wanted that in the inaugural game in their new stadium. One of my favorite aspects of the new stadium is, and if you go to Georgia high school games or just high school games in general, I'm guessing, one of the big things that always goes on is while everybody's watching the game, the kids, in some cases teenagers, certainly, 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, they're always playing their own version of football while the game's going on. It's a, two-hand touch or something like that. Well, Buford's actually built a field for that, for the kids to play on while the game's going on. I think that's a really classy touch. I think that's really nice. I really happy for the entire community in Buford for this new stadium. I think it's awesome. Let us see what else. Yeah, so a lot of stuff rolling in here on the DawgNation chat. Let me check in on YouTube here for a moment, too. And we'll do a couple of minutes there before we kind of get rocking and rolling with the big show today. Jeff Sentell, happy to welcome him back to the program today. Looking forward to that. Eddie from Ackworth checks in. We love Eddie. And Ernest Green yesterday said that the mentality at Georgia is it's 4th and 1 every day. Eddie checks in to say it's 4th and 1 at UGA, baby. Eddie, it's great to hear from you, and I'm glad you're here today, and that's a great reminder. We're going to hear from Ernest Green a little bit later on, too. I like him a lot. I think he's a very important part of this Georgia team, and very, very good stuff. Let's see what else. Chris Jacobs encourages people to hit the like button. I appreciate that. He also says that Tyreek Green was busting heads last night. You love that. By the way, Dina Pruitt checking in from Alaska today. Dina shared an awesome picture for me. And first of all, how early in the morning is it in Alaska right now? That's awesome to see Dina checking in from there. That really is incredible. Very good stuff. In fact, you may see Dina later on today. The honest truth is, it did occur to me right before the show started that, I forgot to make the golden shoe for today. So we're going to see if we can get this turned around quick enough to get this on the air later on. But yeah, Dina Pruitt checking in from we'll make sure we get that done. We're going to get some help to make sure we get that done. But very, very good stuff. And I thank you to Dina for checking in from Alaska. That is amazing. Colby Strotter, Chris Solomon, and others checking in. You certainly appreciate that. Colby Strotter also looking forward to Friday Night Lights tonight. Yeah, boy, I'm happy to have it back and personally thrilled to be a part of it. Jay Shipe's back from a week in L.A., as we like to call it, Lower Alabama. Very funny stuff from Jay, and I'm glad he's here today. Robert O. Shields is also excited about high school football starting up, which I am as well. Chris Solomon says that Valdosta has got more state championships than Buford. It does. Interested to see if, this year we can, it's been a while since, it's certainly the top classifications we've seen a South Georgia team win the state championship. Maybe this is the year that could happen. Either way, fun stuff. It's actually late. So let me get ready to get the show started today. Let's fire up that animation. Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, rolling into a great weekend. And for Georgia, it is an important one. Another scrimmage coming up on Saturday. We are thrilled about that. We'll get a chance to. There will be fewer boosters in this one than last week, so there's probably a little, the information may not be quite as free-flowing, but there's always going to be a robust rumor mill, so we'll be covering that here as close as we can over the next few days. And in anticipation of that, we'll talk about kind of what we expect to see and the level of motivation for Georgia ahead of it, and that may be the most important part of it. Jeff Sentell joins us today. I'm glad to have him back on the program. Been a couple of weeks since we've been able to speak to him. And one example before we're done of one reason why I would say the situation around one SEC team and one of Georgia's stiffest competitors is a little bit different than it is around UGA. I'm going to tell you about that here coming up. We're glad you are with us for today. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Tomorrow is a very important day for Georgia football. Now, most of us, unless you really are like landed gentry, you will not be there to see this. This is another one of those kind of closed-door scrimmages. And, last week, McGill Society, which is a larger body of boosters, they were invited to be a part of this. There will be, if tradition holds, and I'm guessing it probably will, there will be fewer boosters there tomorrow, and there may be some other folks that sometimes kind of get in there. So there'll be some rumor mill, but maybe not quite as a robust of, hey, I heard about this and I heard about that. There may just be a little less of that for Georgia's scrimmage tomorrow, but nonetheless, it is an important kind of next step as Georgia prepares itself for the 2025 season. So we're going to take a couple of minutes here to talk about, kind of what this might be like, but also maybe more importantly than that, what the mindset of Georgia is, and based on what we've heard from a couple of players this week, and that may be the most important part of this overall. So let's start with this. Earlier this week, by way of kind of looking what might happen tomorrow, Kirby Smart was kind enough to kind of look back on the scrimmage from this past Saturday. One thing we know for sure is weather we would expect much warmer tomorrow, which is kind of what Kirby Smart says he wants. If you want to go back, kind of last week, obviously it was, I would say, unseasonably cool, which is not always great preparation for what you're going to get once the season actually begins. So with Georgia set to scrimmage again tomorrow, and this will be an important kind of dress rehearsal for the actual season. Let's go back and hear from earlier this week what Kirby Smart thought of the scrimmage his team participated in last week at this time. This is Kirby Smart.
Yeah, the temperature made things not as trying, not as mentally tough. I thought the speeds were good. You look back over the years, and the first scrimmage is always in a lot of heat, and also they're coming after hot practices, so it's not just that day, it's what's happened the previous 3 or 4 days. And the totality of practicing in 110, 105 heat index a couple days in a row can take its toll on that scrimmage, and that wasn't the case this time. I don't think that's any indication that we're in any better shape. I think it's just an indication of the weather. So they're really competitive drives, several long drives on. I was pleased with the effort in the first scrimmage. We didn't tackle exactly great, which is the first time we really tackled live. We've done a little more live tackling than we have in the past, so we did do some prior to the scrimmage. But I was really pleased with the effort on special teams. I think that's where we set ourselves apart in scrimmages, because we do the special teams within the scrimmage, and we didn't have, we have guys competing for spots on those units, and I thought they competed really hard. So I was pleased. Some silly procedural penalties both ways, but pleased with the effort of both groups. We're just not where we need to be yet.
So obviously we would expect Kirby to say not where they need to be yet, and that's why they're continuing their work ahead of the upcoming season. I also think it's interesting, or I should say at the beginning of this week, we talked about when you look back at last Saturday's scrimmage and all the stuff that you might have heard on social media or in our chat or even, from me on the show, eyewitness accounts are sometimes a little bit unreliable, that you don't always necessarily remember exactly what your eyes thought they saw. And I think the Kirby Smart in that particular clip there uses a couple of pretty interesting words. He talks about the fact that he thought last Saturday's scrimmage was really competitive. And sometimes I don't know that an even competition lends itself to a proper description. In other words, if I saw a practice rep and so just blew up so-and-so, that's a pretty easy thing to retell. But if I saw an even battle between two equal football players, sometimes for someone who's not there for every rep of practicing everything that goes on, sometimes retelling exactly what you saw is not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because it's a competitive battle, and it's a little bit hard to tell who exactly got the upper hand. But when Smart says that he likes the effort, we take him seriously on that, because nobody harps on the need for continual effort more so than Smart. When he says he was relatively pleased with the overall performance, once again, Smart's the sort of guy that throws compliments around like manhole covers. So if he says he's pleased, I don't choose those words lightly. I don't think it means that, oh my gosh, Georgia lit the world on fire. I just think that means that last week was kind of a good first step towards mini steps that get Georgia ready to begin the season here in a couple of weeks, and most importantly, go on the road at Tennessee in the middle part of September. And I'll re-rack something I said, I think last week this time is, I will admit that I'm hoping for good news from the offense. That sort of seems to be the side of the ball where maybe Georgia needs, I would say, the biggest boost overall. And I think the group that maybe is in the spotlight as much as anything is that Georgia offensive line. We have talked about Juan Gaston's emergence there. We've talked about the fact that you've got, now healthy tackles like Monroe Freeling and Ernest Green. Both want to demonstrate how good of football players they are. As you know, I'm big believers in both. I think they both just have the potential to bring a lot to Georgia. And I think I'm using some of this from like what Cole Kubelik has told us this offseason and others. I think there may be, on the part of many Georgia fans, some pleasant surprises about just how good a guy like Green and Freeling can be, and how important they could prove to be for Georgia overall. And with that in mind, kind of going into tomorrow's scrimmage, yesterday we had a chance to hear from Georgia's tackle, Ernest Green, and Ernest talked about kind of moving into this new scrimmage, offensive line playing together, and the reps they get together kind of helping build the chemistry that matters for an offensive line in the way that it doesn't always necessarily matter for other position groups. This is what Green said about that when he spoke to reporters yesterday.
Yeah, well, for sure, me personally, I always just talk about reps, and it takes reps and to build camaraderie and good chemistry and everything, and I feel like we've gotten a lot of that leading up to now, so now it's just about making sure everything molds together the right way and correctly. And this time of year, compared to scrimmage one, it's just about, making better checks, sometimes getting some better plays, certain coverages or pressures and stuff like that. So it's just making the whole thing come around full circle and trying to tighten up everything you can going into Saturday.
This is a small thing, and I don't pretend to be a scout, but one of the things I do prefer when it comes to analysis of offensive line, it's almost like if you kind of get deep in the weeds of like NBA statistics, there's a lot of stuff that's out there of how this five plays when they're on the floor together, the plus-minus numbers and things like that. I sort of think it's more helpful to think of an offensive line as a collective unit more so than an individual player. Just knowing how, for instance, your left guard played doesn't necessarily tell me about how the offensive line played overall. Guys help each other. Guys learn to play with each other. I think that Green, in that particular description, does a pretty good job of kind of explaining the cohesiveness, the cohesion that sort of goes in to all of that, and Saturday is another day for that to take place. As I said before, I will admit I am rooting for good news for this offense, good news for this offensive line, because that's the biggest area of improvement, we might say, for Georgia from kind of what didn't happen a year ago. And many of us still have memories of the moment last season when that was the most, I think, prominent. Obviously, the game against Notre Dame. A lot of us, if we're just being honest, kind of shocked that Georgia lost that game to Notre Dame. We're kind of used to seeing against non-SEC competition. Georgia had this long winning streak of mostly blowing out opponents in those sorts of games. And last year against Notre Dame, that just didn't happen. Notre Dame's defense, which had been good all season long, was also good against Georgia. And for Gunnar Stockton in his first start, really did not get the benefit of a great offensive line performance that day. And you're probably not surprised by this. Green says for he and his teammates, the memory of that performance still lingers. So as they go into tomorrow's scrimmage and this season, demonstrating to folks that they are better than maybe what the reputation that was earned from that game against Notre Dame, that is a big source of motivation, we're led to believe, for Georgia this year. This is what Ernest Green said about that yesterday.
I mean, yeah, no, for sure. That's not the only game we lost, though, as well. So, you look at every loss that you take and you go back to the drawing board and reassess and try to figure out a way to get better and improve from it. And just remember that feeling from after the game, the motivation all season right now.
So Green kind of matter of fact and to the point, but clearly the memory of that game, and as he says, the other games that Georgia lost last season are still pretty intense on their mind. And this kind of leads me to something else that we heard yesterday, and I will say that I like this because, look, I think for a lot of us, we view this upcoming season for Georgia as a real opportunity. For those of us who kind of live in the world of what opposing fans are saying or various media types might be saying, we just sort of feel like, and obviously we would be, likely to feel this way because most of us are Georgia fans, but we just sort of feel that Georgia has been kind of unfairly counted out or ignorantly disregarded, that somehow there's this dismissal of Georgia because Georgia dared lose a couple of games a year ago. That just sort of seems really silly. And what we want to believe is that Georgia is as fired up as it's ever been to go out there and prove to folks, hey, whatever you thought Georgia was, because Georgia had the temerity not to win the national championship, whatever you think that proves about Georgia, we are quite eager to prove something different here in 2025. And it's one of the reasons why I kind of like the Mike Bobo press conference the other day. And we talked about this a lot of the time. I thought that Bobo, as well as anybody this offseason, really articulated okay, yeah, we own the fact, some stuff's got to get better, and optimistic that we believe we're on the right track towards making it better. I thought that was a really good message shared by Bobo the other day. But a lot of this stuff is way more powerful than it comes when it comes from other players. I'm going to give you an example of this. So we just heard Ernest Green say, yeah, I remember the Notre Dame game, but I also remember all the games we lost. And as we're working this offseason, we work with the memory of what maybe people said about us when we didn't play particularly well in some of those games. And somebody who says he's seen that and somebody who says that his unit has some of the same kind of stuff going on is KJ Bolden. We're going to talk more about KJ here in a couple of minutes. It's cool to see how quickly Bolden has become kind of one of the elder statesmen on this Georgia roster. Now, a very, I think, effective spokesman for Georgia. But when he was asked about what he's seeing from the offense, he sort of used the phrase that I think kind of sums up what a lot of us hope is true about Georgia right now. As they go into a scrimmage tomorrow, get ready for a season in a couple of weeks, this is a team ready to show people that it is a lot more than whatever you may have concluded about it in 2024. This is what KJ Bolden said yesterday about the Georgia offense and kind of how the story for the defense isn't all that different either. KJ Bolden.
I mean, this year, they just more hungry. We last year they ended where we wanted to end, and I just feel like everybody, not even just the offense but the defense, we all just got chips on our shoulder. Always the end goal is to get to the daddy. We just got to take it one step at a time. So I just feel like they just been hungry. Everybody just been hungry. We just want to make each other better and just compete every day against each other.
One of the things that I always notice about clips is words that are repeated frequently. We just played about 30 seconds worth of KJ Bolden. Did you notice Bolden used the word hungry 3 times? I like that. I do. I like the idea of Georgia being so hungry that a guy like Bolden would say hungry at the beginning, hungry twice at the end. I like the idea of Georgia being, to use his word, that hungry. He also mentions the idea of a national championship. I do believe that is still very much a realistic possibility for Georgia in a way that it is not for most of the other teams in the country, including many that would aspire to be as good as Georgia. They cannot realistically dream of national championships this year to the same way that Georgia can. It's okay to say that out loud. At Georgia, the national championship is still the mission, and this is a team that can still get that done. Preseason number 4 in the coaches, preseason number 5 in the AP. Yes, Georgia is within arm's length of another national championship if this season goes the way that it could. Last year, that didn't happen. We all know that. But we should also know this. The Georgia players, KJ Bolden included, they are not happy about last year's outcome. They have, to use Bolden's phrase, he just said it, chips on their shoulder. Now, just wanting it doesn't mean you get it. If that was the case, I would have gotten the G.I. Joe aircraft carrier when I was a kid. Just wanting it doesn't mean you get it. But the fact that these Georgia players seem to really want it, I would say that's a good sign as Georgia goes into a scrimmage tomorrow that we expect to be far hotter than it was last week, where they'll be challenged to a greater degree than they were this time a week ago. The building blocks that get the team ready for the season, anything you can do to dig deep and find the extra motivation, of course it matters. And KJ Bolden says, offense, chip on its shoulder because of last year. Defense, kind of the same way. To me, that's a good sign that the mindset of these Georgia Bulldogs, championship aspirations once again, right where it needs to be as the finishing touches get done and taken care of when it comes to some preseason preparation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. What a thrill and privilege it is to have you as a part of our program here today. We're glad you're with us. And that means video 10 a.m. Live across all platforms. For most people, though, our video is an on-demand product, so you watch it whenever it's convenient. You put it up on the big screen at home, or you put it on the phone while you're working out at the gym, or maybe listening while you're on a commute, whatever you're doing. Just glad that there's something that works for you. Our friends on the radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify. Just an awesome, awesome opportunity to have you a part of our show somehow, some way. 10th anniversary year for us. 10 years of doing DawgNation Daily. Man, that's an awesome thing for sure. So the official 10th anniversary date for DawgNation was the other day. I need to figure out exactly when this is. We are coming up on probably about a week or so away, I would say, from the official 10th anniversary of DawgNation Daily, starting 10 years ago exactly, someday in the near future, probably next week or so, because I started a little later than the actual website itself started. So we're just enjoying all of that. I am a sentimental person. I like kind of nostalgic, retrospectives, and I'm sure we'll be doing plenty of that. I certainly think a lot about that as we kind of go through all of this. But I'm as excited about the future as I've ever been, and grateful to have Kroger a part of that here too. And speaking of the future generation's hard at work right now. They are back at school. I would say just about everybody in Georgia, no matter what system you're part of, is kind of back in school now. But there's always like that sort of last minute thing of, teacher said she needs more Kleenex or more whatever else. Or if you're like my kids, it's like we go and do this big school supply thing. I have a son and a daughter. That by the end of the school year, her school supplies are going to look just as nice on the last day of school as they do on the first day of school. You sort of know that. She just takes care of her stuff. My son has probably already lost all of his. If I had to guess, I'm guessing he doesn't have any of his school supplies left anymore. We had, 2 or 3 days of school by this point in time. I'm sure he's lost everything we bought him. So you got to kind of go back for round 2 of the school supplies eventually. Well, guess what? As you're doing all that, our friends from Kroger got you covered on that too. And this is one of the busiest times of year for folks. Back to school means back to sports, means football season. It means just all kinds of stuff, both professionally and with your family and just recreationally. It's just a lot going on right now. So take advantage of the Kroger Boost membership program to kind of get more convenience. And frankly, as you're driving around all these places, find a way to save more money at the pump here too. The dollars you're already spending at Kroger, you're going to get twice the fuel points on that as a Kroger Boost member. Plus, you can take advantage of free grocery delivery, free grocery pickup. That's super convenient. So find out more online, Kroger.com. You can also check out Kroger.com/boost for more on that today there as well. That is Kroger.com/boost. All right, we're going to have Jeff Sentell here coming up in a moment. Thrilled to have him with us. Been a couple of weeks since we've spoken to Jeff, so we will do a lot with Jeff here in just a little bit, kind of an overarching landscape of kind of what's going on for Georgia recruiting, and we'll probably, if I had to guess, based on what we're about to discuss, maybe get into a little bit of some former elite recruits for Georgia that could be ready to pop in a big way for the Dogs here this season. Let me also tell you, as I said before, Georgia's got a scrimmage tomorrow, finishing touches on preseason preparation. Season starts shortly after that, couple of tune-up games, and then on September 13th, the big one goes down. Major test for Georgia on the road at Tennessee. You better believe these Vols have it circled. It's one of their big games, a chance to kind of get a win and be competitive against Georgia in a way they haven't for quite some time. Georgia has dominated at Tennessee every year going back to 2017. You better believe that Tennessee wants to change that here this year. Therefore, Georgia and DawgNation, we all have to be at our best that day. So in anticipation of the biggest games of the year, DawgNation is throwing one of its biggest events of the year. It is our DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River. Y'all, this is the sort of thing I am just very grateful to say I was able to do. When we did this in 2023, the kind of classic, paddle wheel riverboat, multi-level, gorgeous vessel, sailing this up and down the Tennessee River for a couple of hours, enjoying the buffet on the boat, enjoying the bar, and you get your drink tickets for all the beverages, hanging out with DawgNation folks, doing some DawgNation shows, some of the best Georgia fans you'll ever be with. Just really an extraordinary experience, and something that I was very proud to be part of, and something that I was so just really, really excited about and eager to do here for 2025, and we are able to do that again. Now, tickets for this are going very fast, and if you want to secure your DawgNation Invasion t-shirt, you really need to act right now. So go to DawgNation.com/tailgate while supplies last. Get yourself the DawgNation Invasion ticket, which will include the DawgNation Invasion t-shirt. I'm sure plenty more swag items to give away here too. Food and beverage on the boat, an incredible riverboat experience up and down the Tennessee River, a tailgate unlike any other you're ever going to have. So check out DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. It's Saturday, September 13th is the date. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that today. All right, before we get ready to speak to Jeff Sentell about UGA recruiting and some of the former Georgia recruits doing big things to the Dogs this year, let's also get ready to go around the DawgHouse here today, presented by our friends at Zagoria Law. And we just heard from KJ Bolden a moment ago. I think the Bolden is a reminder of something that's really important for both Georgia football and probably life in general in some respects. Yeah, I always try to pay attention to counterintuitive things that are absolutely true. One of those is that I think for a lot of us, we sort of think, hey, to be a better man, be better people, we need to work on our weaknesses. And sometimes you probably do. Certainly there are plenty of weaknesses I wish I could improve upon. But for the most part, sort of a bedrock foundational success principle is maintaining your strengths, making sure your strengths stay strong and kind of leaning into your strengths. That's typically a better recipe for success than just sort of beating your head against the wall and trying to, improve every one of your weaknesses, because everybody's got some. Leaning into your strengths, typically a little bit more of a successful idea. I think that football teams function a little bit that way too. Oftentimes in the NFL draft, you see teams, look at their best player. They see him aging, getting expensive. Oftentimes they're like drafting his replacement, as opposed to what fans sometimes want them to do. We have a glaring weakness at so-and-so spot. That's where you need to draft. Football teams sometimes also sort of operate from the mindset of, we didn't make sure our strengths stay strong, because our strengths come together to form our identity. We need to make sure that remains true. I would say that Georgia football is to a degree that way as well. And when you look at some of the foundational strengths that have been the obvious, I think, areas in which Georgia's defined itself, one of those is outstanding safety play. It probably, started with Georgia. You want to go back to the beginning of the Kirby Smart era. You think about a guy like, say, J.R. Reed. J.R. Reed sort of gives way to Richard LeCounte. Richard LeCounte sort of gives way to Lewis Cine. Lewis Cine gives way to guys like Dan Jackson and certainly Malachi Starks, who became a first-round pick. But you've got this heritage where it's multiple first-round picks, more All-Americans than you realize. J.R. Reed became an All-American, for instance, playing this position. You've just got so much success for Georgia at the safety position. And it's probably the worst kept secret in the world as to why that's true. Obviously, Kirby Smart played safety. And there's, of course, just going to be a passion from him about this position. And clearly, Georgia's benefited from this great safety play. And now you see what looks like the baton being passed one more time. Guys like Starks and Jackson now giving it over to KJ Bolden. When you heard Bolden a moment ago say, oh, yeah, the offense, yeah, they're fired up. They're hungry. We are too. We have chips on our shoulder. That is the sort of thing that Malachi Starks could have said previously, or Lewis Cine could have said before that. KJ Bolden is now in the position of being a leader for Georgia. And it's just, to me, kind of fun to watch in the way in which this becomes sort of a renewable resource for UGA. The sort of elite safety that could be a future first-round pick, and certainly a dominant and valuable player here in the SEC. Bolden, the latest in a long line of those safeties in the Kirby Smart era. This is what KJ said yesterday about learning from some of the great safeties who came before him, including guys like Malachi Starks and Dan Jackson. This is KJ Bolden from yesterday.
Yeah, just watching the way they do things. Watching. They taught me how to watch film the right way. In certain ways you got to watch film. Just being invested into it. They just taught me so many things, like just how to treat your body, the little things, and the playbook. They always taught me about the playbook a lot. I feel like they just invested in me so much to where this year I could just do the same to the new younger guys. I could just invest in them. So, definitely, I feel like they did a great job with that for sure.
So there's a phrase that sometimes you see online that says, like, life comes at you fast, and that's typically meant to be sort of a sarcastic joke when you see it on social media. But because I spend so much time around football, I would say that it forces life to come at me pretty fast. And I'll just be completely candid for a moment. Sometimes I get kind of nervous about how fast everything moves. I'm talking about years just kind of roll by, and you just can't hardly believe the pace of life. And to me, the football calendar is one of the reasons why I feel that way. I mean, it does not seem like it wasn't like 5 seconds ago that Bolden was a guy at Buford High School, and I'm covering him and watching him and showing his games on TV, and I really became very impressed with him as a player. He's not the biggest safety necessarily, but boy, at the high school level, he was really willing to be physical on a very talented team. I thought he was, to me, clearly the best player. I came to really like him, but as a high school guy, you just sort of see him as sort of this youngish person. I mean, I'm getting to the point now where I'm basically old enough to be a high school player's dad. So you just sort of see him as this very youngish person. And then you blink your eye, and all of a sudden now here he is standing there being a vocal leader for Georgia. He's like the stately veteran in the room now after being a freshman trying to learn from Malachi and Dan Jackson a year ago. Now he's the veteran player speaking on behalf of the entire team. Like, does it ever just sort of shock you how fast everything goes by? High school to leader in essentially the blink of an eye. Now, some of that's just sort of the accelerated pace of football these days, but it's still, it has a significant impact on me to watch how fast all this happens. And all of a sudden now you go from what Bolden is saying there. Last year, I'm trying to soak up every word from Malachi Starks. I'm trying to soak up every word from Dan Jackson. I'm trying to get all the information from them the same way they got it from Lewis Cine, and they got it from Richard LeCounte before that, and on you want to go. And now Bolden is giving it to everybody else. He's sort of like the grandpa in the room now, telling everybody all the wise, lessons that he's learned from those who came before him. It's just an amazing, way in which this wisdom sort of gets passed down over and over again. And yesterday, KJ also talked about that, of kind of what it's like to now take the information that he's gotten, and now he's giving it to other players as a leader on this team right now. I think this is interesting. This is once again KJ Bolden.
the new guys, I'm just trying to teach them. Feel me? We watch film every day. You know, we go to the playbook every day at night with the new guys and transfer. So, feel me? I'm just trying to teach them the way we do things around here. You know, but I feel like they're doing a great job getting the playbook down and just feel me coming out to practice every day ready to work.
When you watch Bolden say that, you see him standing there. There's a certain, and maybe I'm projecting this, but it seems true. There's a certain confidence that seems to exist there. He's standing pretty tall. He's not the tallest guy, but he's standing tall. His shoulders are kind of back. He looks assured of himself there. And that to me is a really important story for Georgia. I do believe that KJ Bolden is, full stop, one of the very best players in this team. And if you're looking for like massive breakout names that are known to Georgia fans now but could be known to everyone by the end of the season, well, of course, KJ Bolden is as good an example of that as you're going to find. And we're going to talk to Jeff Sentell more about this in a moment, recruits that he's covered in many cases, that the story for Georgia overall is you got to have as many guys like KJ Bolden as possible. Safest bet for breakout seasons are, to me, always going to be guys who have been here. They know the situation. They've learned from guys before them. They're now imparting that wisdom on others, but they're also internalizing a little bit deeper as they're going through all of this for at least the second time, certainly in KJ's case, here going into year two. That you need guys who've been in the program, second-year guys, third-year guys, to take that next step. And if enough of them can do it the way that we believe that KJ Bolden will, of course, that spells good news for the Dogs this fall. And that is Around the DawgHouse, presented today by Zagoria Law. Now, what is not good news as it relates to dogs, you see this stuff in the news, unfortunately, all the time. You know, it just seems like oftentimes there's just negligent behavior on the part of people in all types of ways. People don't drive as carefully as they could. They don't, take care of their property as well as they could. And that creates, big issues. Well, some of that's also going to be true as it relates to dog ownership as well. Big, sometimes dangerous dogs get free, and dog bites or, being knocked down by a dog, especially if you're a child or an elderly person, these can lead to broken bones and injuries like that. We feel if that's your story, if you've been impacted by something like that, or if somebody you love is in that situation, we think that you ought to deserve your chance to fight for compensation in that, just like any other personal injury situation. That's where our friends at Zagoria Law can step in and provide great counsel for you. They literally wrote the book on how to win the sort of cases that we're talking about here: dog bite, dog injury, negligent behavior on the part of a dog owner. They have specialized in this very narrow aspect of personal injury law. They're the only law firm in Georgia that can say that. So if this is your story, of course you would want to go straight to the category expert in this particular aspect of personal injury law. That is what Zagoria Law is. So give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's DOG, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, or online, ZagoriaLaw.com. I'll spell it for the podcast, folks. ZAGORIA, ZagoriaLaw.com. Make sure you check them out today. If you or someone you love, has been injured, bitten by a dog, negligent behavior on the part of the owner, let's get you the compensation you deserve. Let's let Zagoria Law fight to get it for you. Reach out to them here today. Okay, before we're done, a pretty big difference between Georgia and one of its, most intense competition for SEC and national championships, kind of go about their business in a slightly different way. We'll tell you more about why before we're done. But for now, on a whole bunch of stuff, including a big night for Georgia high school football last night, and a lot of former elite recruits kind of getting their moment with the Dogs here this season, let us talk to Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let us say hello to Jeff Sentell. Jeff was a part of an amazing debut for Buford last night, $60+ million stadium there. We're going to talk more about that in a moment because it was also a very good game, too, involving two programs that are certainly very much on the radar for UGA recruiting observers in most years. We'll get to that here coming up, including a busy slate of high school football here this weekend. Jeff, if you don't mind, though, let me kind of lean on your past recruiting coverage here. Just talked about KJ Bolden. First of all, it's great to have you back on the program, but just talked about KJ Bolden. I think if you're looking for Georgia kind of getting closer to its kind of highest possible end of season accomplishments and achieving its most lofty goals. Guys like Bolden, second, maybe in some cases third-year players, using the experience to pair with their athleticism, getting the most out of their talents, to me, that just stands out as, I would say, among the most important storylines for Georgia here right now. So if we said that Bolden is the easiest answer, I certainly think he's something close to a given. We expect him to be one of Georgia's best players. Who are the other, and let's keep it to a short list here, sort of second, maybe third-year guys who haven't quite become household names regionally, nationally yet, that you think could join KJ in conversations like that by the end of the year?
Yeah, there's a good distinction there, Brandon, because like the name that comes to my mind is, like, listen, KJ's very talented. He's a future first round pick. I expect him to be all SEC consideration, all American consideration as well. I think Christian Miller is going to, maybe the thing for him, Brandon, is he's going to play himself from either being a round 3 or a round 2 or a first round pick this year. And that requires him to have, and we've seen, Brandon, you don't have to be healthy, even though Christian has been fighting a lot of adversity on the injury front. He needs to have about 4 or 5 spectacular games, much the way Mykel Williams did last year. But I'm going to zag here for you. And this might create some consternation with the fan base, because there's a segment of the fan base that's always going to get on the offensive coordinator. I think one of the most important players for this year's team, Brandon, is Drew Bobo. I really do. The way he played last year, he wasn't the prospect that Jared Wilson was, but I think he's a better SEC center. He's one of those glue guys of the team. Brandon, when I heard him, when he spoke to the media this week, he was asked, like, you know, who are you picking the brains of? Like, who are you watching? Like, who are you patterning your game out of? Brandon, he said Cedric Von Granger, and he got to see it up close and personal for 2 seasons while he was redshirting when he first arrived in Athens. I think it's that Cedric Von Granger guy, Brandon, that I thought was missing on last year's Georgia football team. And I think Drew's going to be very important. He's going to know what to do. And listen, this pick, Brandon, ties in with one of Georgia's major goals of the season, and that's to be able to run the football.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. And look, a lot of this is sort of over my head from a football knowledge standpoint. I don't pretend to know more than I do. But people who do know more than I do, this is the sense that I get, is that Jared Wilson, with all due respect, was always a great draft prospect and a great athlete at the center position, and clearly a very valuable commodity in terms of just a unique set of traits for an interior offensive lineman. I don't know that people who know this stuff better than I do thought that Jared Wilson had a great year for Georgia last year, and that's not the same thing. Great draft prospect, not necessarily great year, because the center position just has extra responsibilities. One of the reasons why we talked earlier this week about the fact that, you know, Georgia had Malachi Tolliver go down with an injury. Now you're looking at what I think is probably, you know, based on people who were at the scrimmage on Saturday, maybe Cortez Smith, an incoming freshman, as your backup center. I think that Smith, because he was starting as a freshman in high school, is a really good prospect. But boy, that's young for a backup center. The point that I'm getting to is people need to know that center just has extra responsibilities. And, you know, Jared Wilson, you know, ran like the wind, you know, had the bend. He had all the traits that the NFL draft scouts are looking for. But the sort of extra responsibilities that come with playing center, people that know more about this than I do have sort of intimated, because nobody wants to say it out loud too much, but they've sort of intimated, I don't know that Jared Wilson had a great year for Georgia last year. And I do think that Drew Bobo, even though Wilson was a pretty high draft prospect, I do think it is reasonable that Bobo could be better for Georgia this year than Wilson was for Georgia last year.
I think you make a point there, Brandon, about, I think it's a good teaching case where the line between frontline starter and Georgia's dude, and then the next guy, should injuries happen in a violent attrition game. Like, the other option was Malachi Tolliver, a redshirt freshman who's really never played at all down the depth chart at center. So I think it's a good teaching case where you sit there and you go, okay, everybody's got their guy. This guy's the starter. And center is one of those positions where Georgia is going to get really young really quickly, even with them trying to cross-train a lot of guys back and forth to do that. Now, there are other positions, it seemed, I don't know if you heard this, Brandon, my ear kind of bent in a positive direction when somebody asked Kirby Smart about guards this year, and he said, I feel really good about them. Just kind of very authoritative like that, like feel really good about the guard position. And the Georgia now, when you can maybe swing at Juan Gaston over there for his first year in the SEC, but you already had, ample options with Daniel Calhoun and Mike Gooney. So I think Georgia feels really good at certain spots, and that's one of those. I think I tried to reference my remarks there because I think the offensive line play is just going to decide everything for Georgia's football team this year.
Along those lines, and we've obviously talked about that a lot this week, I have seen enough. I am stopping the fight. I believe unless something changes for the worse, bigger players, oftentimes hotter weather, that's not a great mix. Kirby Smart's been more than happy to make that very clear in the past. Assuming we don't see a regression over the course of these final couple of weeks before the season begins, I believe that the incoming freshman Juan Gaston is one of Georgia's best 5 offensive linemen. I don't know who that leaves as the odd man out in terms of someone's clearly not going to play as much as they would have if that's true. But there's enough buzz around Gaston right now that I assume this must be real.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys there, and you sit there and you go, Brandon, remember how kind of paper thin Georgia was at tackle last year with Ernest, and when Monroe got beat up, everybody saw Monroe try to give a very valiant effort against Notre Dame. But I think Georgia, the tackle position, Bo Hughley's a name you throw in there as well, but I think Gaston makes the difference. I probably go top 6, but I'm not going to debate you on top 5 because he can swing and play so many different positions. He can play the tackle, he can play the guard, and tackle is, Brandon, nobody in college football has enough tackles. And for Georgia to sit there and maybe be able to stick his chest out a little bit that they have 3 or 4 right now, that's pretty strong.
So you mentioned defensive line a moment ago, and what you said about Christian Miller, I think is kind of the perfect example. We're talking about guys who've been here taking the next step. Now, Miller, more of a veteran than KJ Bolden is, but I think it's a perfect example of that. And, much like KJ a year ago was a guy who played, and given how hard that is at a place like Georgia in the SEC, that in itself is remarkable. That's what I sort of view as kind of a likely ceiling for Elijah Griffin this year, another recruit that you've covered in the past. I don't want to shortchange him. I expect him to be in the rotation this year. I think one day he's going to be a great player. I don't expect that to happen this year right now. I think being in the rotation, being a guy that is involved in the process for Georgia this year, I hate to use a word like ceiling, but that might be Griffin's ceiling this year, which could be a really good springboard for the stuff that could happen for him 2026 and 2027. But if you're counting on a freshman being one of your great defensive linemen, I think you're probably grasping at straws.
I think it's interesting, Brandon, because you sit there and you go, maybe it's just the mood that strikes me. Like you had your tone earlier about Jared Wilson, but I think the NFL draft sometimes proves us right. And what I mean by that is last year's team, the bedrocks on the defensive line were Warren Brinson and Nazir Stackhouse. Now, they were veteran dogs who'd both been around since 2020. And there was at some point in their careers, whether it was health or whether it was run or whether it was the kind of lack of the consistent big play where you just wondered, okay, are these good Georgia guys? And they're veterans and they know the scheme and they play hard and they know what to do? Or are they really difference makers? And I think the NFL draft showed us that they leaned more towards the latter. I mean, the former there, because you see, I think nobody went in top 3 or 4 rounds, later day picks, later day draftees. But now you switch, Brandon, you look at this football team. And, Xavier McLeod is a guy that the light should it come on, he has all SEC. He has 2nd, 3rd round talent. Much the same for Jordan Big Baby Hall. And that's another guy the Dogs have kind of been waiting on. He had that up and down year where he just fought to play. But you bring up Elijah Griffin. And Brandon, one thing about Elijah, and he's graduated past the point of recruiting rankings. But we do know this. There was no debate about this guy as the number 1 defensive tackle in the country, Brandon. Even when he was chosen by Georgia. He was stamped by Georgia, and he wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't visiting anywhere. Lots of times there's some artificial flavor that gets intersected or introduced into that conversation. Everybody in the country agreed Elijah Griffin was the best defensive tackle in the country. Brandon, you've probably spent a whole program worth of preseason air talking about Elijah Griffin, from the David Pollock stuff to everything else. I think the thing now for Elijah is he just needs to be available, start playing, and start making a difference, because that guy's going to flash and flash a lot. And I just think Georgia's different, Brandon, when they have a couple of, hey, this guy could be a first rounder on their defensive front. And Georgia's now got a lot more of those guys in the two deep.
So I want to ask about recruiting. So let me just say one more thing about this before we get there. So the point that I've made is that I love fall camp rumors. I try to listen to as many as I can get. You just try to pay attention to what you're hearing. And the hard and fast rule that we operate around on is that good news often leaks, bad news rarely does. That, you know, most of the reporting, most of the sanction rumors are going to be about, boy, you won't believe how good of a camp so-and-so is having. You don't have a lot of, oh my gosh, so-and-so showed up 10 pounds overweight. Somebody probably did, but you just don't get as much of that sort of thing for 1,000 different reasons, which I probably don't necessarily need to explain. So one of the things that, just because we're trying to get the fullest, most complete picture we can get, I always pay attention to what you don't hear. Around this time a year ago, and folks have brought this up to me, I sort of said, if y'all will notice, it's really quiet around wide receiver right now. I don't know what that means, but sometimes no news is not good news. Unfortunately, that was a prophecy that was fulfilled once the season began. Jeff, what I said earlier this week is, and I am more than happy to be wrong if it turns out that I am, all I'm saying is temperature check here right now. It's pretty quiet on the defensive line right now. For someone who just ingests every rumor I can get and every person whose uncle's brother's cousin went to the scrimmage, I want to hear anything I can get. I don't care if it's fourth-hand information. I want all I can get. It is quiet on the defensive line right now, and I do think that's noticeable with 2 weeks to go in the season. I'm happy to hear J.J. Haney's doing good things, and more power to him. But veteran players who are more likely to be Georgia's best defensive linemen, it would be interesting to hear some more, boy, I tell you who looked great today, and have that be the sort of veteran defensive lineman that Georgia is going to be counting on when this season begins.
Tell you the way I take that. That's a good way to look at it, Brandon. So when I hear that I make that assessment, and I do some reasoning on that assessment, I have to sit there and go, because football is always kind of like a teeter-totter yin-yang thing. I go, okay, is that because of a lack of fire, lack of spark, or just lack of juice on defense? Or is it because the offensive line is really playing well? And when you look at the offensive line, Micah Morris, man, that guy could have been in the league 2 years ago, man. He really could have. Could have been a 4-year starter in the SEC if he went to the right program. And this is his first real star turn as a keynote starter across the offensive line. We mentioned Drew Bobo. We mentioned all those other guards. Part of me wonders, and I'll speak frankly, if it's just not the other side of the ball, the offensive line, kind of swallowing those guys up right now. And that's kind of one of those things when Georgia goes good on good. Brandon, this is a type of year when you talk to coaches at any level, two things. Number one, second year, like you mentioned with KJ Bolden, that's always the breakout. That's when the guy makes the most strides from where they came in to where they're eventually going to go. Always the second year. And that's one of those things that really stands out. The second thing is when you're watching football play right now, especially before the guys really get live with somebody else, they wonder, okay, now is our first team offense really that pedestrian? Is it because our defense is really good this year? And you need those first few games to kind of figure out what you really have. And I think Georgia should be able to figure out, I mean, let's be honest, Brandon, that defensive line should flash against Marshall and Austin Peay, and then they get to Tennessee, and that's when we find out what they really got.
All right, so last night you had a chance to be at Buford for the debut of that gorgeous brand new stadium in one of the best games of the year, nationally known Buford and Milton. Buford holds off a potential Milton comeback after a quarterback injury, long winning streak for the Eagles was snapped. It was really a pretty good football game. I didn't see all of it. I did see some of it on television. You were there. It's kind of the place to be in many respects. What was it like being at this brand new football palace and seeing these two very well-known teams kind of renewing their sort of national rivalry after playing a weather-marred game a year ago?
Brandon, I'm going to try to sound funny here. You know how it is when you're a fellow gentleman and you're in the dad lane and you go to somebody else's house and you see the TV and it is strikingly bigger. I'm going to tell you what, Buford and its kids, when they throw here's a good example, Brandon. A punter made a great punt, right? And I remember looking up at their Jumbotron and I go, that kid's face is bigger than any Georgia Bulldog on the Jumbotron at Sanford Stadium. I think they have a better, bigger Jumbotron than the one at Sanford. I really do. And then you go, everything else, like, Brandon, they only seat like 12,000 people, and yet the thing costs $62 million. And you start looking around and you go, well, where does all that go? And you're like, okay, the first thing, you look for the bells and whistles, right? Brandon, Buford literally has a bell that's big enough to be on a movie set at one corner of their end zone. They've got ribbon, the LED digital ribbon advertising. I looked up and I was like, that's probably the first time I've ever seen a scoreboard on both sidelines above the grandstands. And then there's all their little product placement ads that crawl across, like the Wall Street ticker and everything else like that. They definitely had some billfold. They definitely had some spend on all that. And Brandon, you sit there and you look around and you're like, okay, there's never really been anything quite like this in high school football. I think there's a high school stadium in Texas, when you adjust for inflation, that makes Buford High School the second most expensive high school football facility in the country for one school and one school only. But man, they definitely packed everything in there with what they got. I tell you, parking is going to be an issue there, because you have to park really at the school across the street and crosswalk your way over unless you have like the gold.
I've never been to a high school football game that parking wasn't an issue for, though, just to be fair.
Well, yeah, I don't remember crossing 4 lanes of traffic to get to a stadium and everything else, Brandon. But they've got a good thing going there. They've definitely got a centerpiece. And it was interesting remembering some of the reports, Brandon. I don't know if you guys called this game, but do you remember a couple years ago when Buford played Mill Creek and people were like sitting in like the hedges and they were sitting behind ropes and
we weren't there for that game. I know there was a gigantic crowd. I have seen big crowds at the old Tom Ryden Stadium before, but we were not there for the Mill Creek Buford game.
Yeah, I think it was Mill Creek, and I think 12,000 people showed up and only 5,000. There were only 5,000 seats there. So like it's definitely, you just see. I'm just struck by I was looking and I was like, oh my gosh, there's a scoreboard on both sides, and then there's advertising on both sides and everything else. Well, just shows you kind of where things at there. Football, let's talk some football, man. Brandon, I think Milton is very young, especially on the offensive line. Brandon, they've got a freshman and sophomore offensive tackle at Milton that has been offered by Georgia. They're going to be plenty good. I think Kirby Smart had a 28-game win streak. Ben Reeves' win streak at Milton stopped at 25. I think they'll get that sucker cranked up and win a bunch of games. Grant Haviland, the really talented tight end in the 2027 class that Georgia likes. A little banged up, wasn't practicing much. He did catch a jump pass. I think the whole game, Brandon, it swung on basically how calls that were made, calls were not. It was very interesting. There was a pick six on one side of the field, and then there was another end zone interception on the other side of the field that really swung momentum back and forth in a really, really good game. I walked away from that one thinking those were still two of the best, maybe 5 or 6 teams in all of Georgia high school football.
Can I tell you something? And Buford's always sort of a lightning rod program, and a big stadium like this kind of comes with, I guess, a degree of controversy. Unequivocally, I am in favor of $60 million high school football stadiums. I think highly functioning local governments and highly functioning local school systems ought to aspire to do great and amazing things. This is the sort of local school system version of a moonshot. We ought to reach for the stars. And I think it's an avatar for the support the students get in a system like that. And therefore, to go along with all the investment they've had in like fine arts and things like that. Without equivocation, I am in favor of $60 million high school football stadiums.
There won't be many of them, Brandon, but that county, that city school system is really different than everyone else, where they have such a surplus that comes from their natural resources and everything else, their utility companies in the city whatsoever that they do try to put together. Also got to mention the two Georgia commits on the winning side. Graham Houston played a lot of played a lot of right tackle. He's definitely their power tackle for Buford when they try to run. Also Ty Boogie Green. I think he only had 6 carries, but he had 1 touchdown. He also played enforcer on the defensive side. Had some highlights where he had some run, Brandon, where it made folks wonder, could he be a running back at Georgia as well? Buford's got an interesting scheme where they kind of just methodically matriculate the way down the field using a lot of their other weapons. And then when it gets into glory land red zone time, then they start feeding the ball to Tyreek. And that's an interesting way they're using him. Very physical, Brandon. I don't know if one of the running storylines from that game is that Milton's quarterback, his helmet must have flown off like 5 or 6 times at least during the game. And a lot of that had to do from some very violent collisions.
Yeah, so I'll conclude with this. I mean, it seemed like a great game. And obviously, big weekend coming up. I'm lucky enough to call 4 games over the course of the next 2 days, so I'll be very busy, and I'm looking forward to them all. But, Jeff, I do get the privilege on Saturday night, our final game from Mercedes-Benz Stadium tomorrow on Atlanta News First, WANF, Channel 46. The nationally ranked teams, North Gwinnett battling against Douglas County. One of the best games I'll get to do all year long. There is certainly a special sense of anticipation for me for that game. How about for you for the upcoming high school weekend, either from a Georgia recruiting standpoint or just sort of an in-state standpoint? What are you maybe looking in on as this is like, this is it. This is not scrimmage. This is not preseason. High school football in Georgia begins this weekend. It's already started. We are in the midst of the actual football season here right now. What are you looking forward to?
There's a lot. I think, Brandon, you mentioned Douglas County. A lot of people think Douglas might be the best team in the state right now heading in, considering what they retained. Like Johnny White at Douglas has really pointed towards this senior season for a lot of his guys with this class. I'm intrigued by an earlier game at the Corky Kell at the Benz. I get to see Georgia's safety commitment, Jordan Smith, and then they take on a good Brookwood team, Brandon. Georgia has a legacy there as well, and then they're fantastic junior running back as well. He told me last week, Brandon, he wants to run for over 3,000 yards during his junior year. And I was like, man, that's a lofty goal for a big-time bell cow running back. I think Kamari Brooks gets going tonight, North Oconee versus Oconee. That one's kind of caught my eye a little bit, but especially because of the younger players that are at North Oconee. But another one, Brandon, Bolden High School actually comes to Roswell, Georgia. They're going to face Fellowship Christian. Caden Prothrow, the 5-star Georgia tight end commitment, will be in action. And most people won't remember this, but Fellowship Christian actually beat Bowden last year in their three-peat state title season. So there's a lot of dogs popping up. I think Jared Curtis, Brennan, I don't know if you saw this news. He doesn't start for a couple more days. They don't get going in Nashville until I believe next weekend. He did make some news a little bit by telling the Tennessean, I don't know if you saw this, Brandon. He told the Tennessean that he planned to be at every Georgia home game this year. That's pretty good participation from someone from the 615 area code, I believe.
That's really interesting information, Jeff. I appreciate that. Yeah, like I said, we're looking forward to a great weekend of high school football. I'll see you tonight, Barron Stadium in Rome. We've got the great Steve Gates, of course, longtime Georgia ties with him, against Billy Napier's brother, by the way, the head coach of LaGrange. Coach Napier, really a great guy. It's one of those things, Jeff, I'll let you go. We're running late. As a Georgia fan, Gator hater, you don't want the Napier family to be as great as they are, but I'm telling you right now, Coach Napier from LaGrange, one of the great guys in the world. Everybody says the same thing is true of Billy Napier there as well. Of course, longtime lineage in the state of Georgia. I truly love Coach Napier from LaGrange. I think he's an awesome guy. And so that's a great game. Rome and Creekside tonight. Rome is really back in terms of having, some great players. Georgia Tech's had a couple of really good commits off that Rome team. And, of course, Creekside will play literally anybody. They play the Falcons tomorrow tomorrow with 5 hours notice. They just would. And then it's obviously a quartet of games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium tomorrow. I know you're as excited about it as I am. Jeff, I will look forward to seeing you when I see you, but also talking with you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger again very soon as well.
You got it, buddy. Have a great call this weekend.
Thank you so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really looking forward to all of that. A lot of Georgia stuff. I think if you're a Georgia fan, when you're watching high school football, you're going to get a lot of intriguing, stuff as it relates to that. For instance, George Smith, the Georgia commit for Austin County tomorrow. That'll be on Atlanta News First. I think he's I had a chance to see him in person the other day. Really good-looking athlete in person. I think the Georgia fans are going to really like him a lot. Of course, he's taking on Brookwood. D'Angelo Tyson, you'll remember him. His son is a great running back for Brookwood right now. They have a long history of running the ball very well. Tyson, kind of the latest example of that. I think that McEachern Walton for us, really good game tomorrow. Both those schools have been good to Georgia over the years. And then the big one tomorrow night, nationally ranked Douglas County, nationally ranked North Gwinnett. I just think it's going to be awesome. I hope you'll tune in to see us tomorrow on Atlanta News First, tonight on the Peachtree Sports Network. For me, it's 4 games over the next 2 days. So high school football is here, and we are rocking and rolling with all of that. And because of the high school football, I actually was not on Star of the Seas this week. But boy, I wish I was. And it's one of those things where, at night, I'm kind of like just trying to kind of sort of calm down and cool down after a busy day. And one of the things I'll do is I like to sort of consume some travel content. And I'm kind of looking at the people who've been on Star of the Seas. They're sharing their videos and things like that. And I don't know, man, it makes me really long for that moment when I do get a chance to be on this brand new Icon class of cruise ships sailing now out of Port Canaveral. The inaugural sailing here is coming up, and I just think it's going to be a game changer because the chance to sail on a ship like this in our closest port and have that 7-night experience and all of the things that made kind of Icon of the Seas famous, that's all kind of been sort of, they're kind of running it back here with Star of the Seas. That means the specialty restaurants and the unbelievable entertainment. Like, one of the things I'll give you is, so a lot of the Royal Caribbean cruise ships have a signature Broadway-style show on board. Do you know what the show is on this ship, on Star of the Seas? It's Back to the Future. Like, what an unbelievable full-scale Broadway production. My understanding is, I have obviously not seen this in person, my understanding is the DeLorean flies in the theater, which is just amazing. There's also a special mascot kind of on board. Sailor is the brand new dog that, if you're lucky enough, you'll see him walking around on Star of the Seas. Y'all, it's an unbelievable experience, and you need to have it for yourself sometime here late 2025, heading towards 2026. 7-night itineraries on Star of the Seas. Jessica Slater can tell you all about it. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready to go for Star of the Seas, our DawgNation cruise on Utopia of the Seas, Icon of the Seas, Wonder of the Seas, all of the great vessels that make Royal Caribbean famous. She can get you ready to go on all of that. All right, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here right now. And I think it's interesting how Alabama goes about its quarterback situation, a little bit different than I would say that Georgia does. And this is even with the changeover at head coach now with Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator, Kalen DeBoer, the head coach. It's just really interesting to me how different the rollout for Ty Simpson has been compared to, like, say, Gunnar Stockton to Georgia, where the stories are somewhat similar. They're both former, top recruits, highly rated recruits. They've both kind of waited their turn. And they're both going to get their chance to be sort of full season starters here this year. But doesn't it seem like, and I'm not trying to be too snarky when I say this, I'm trying to have a real football conversation. Doesn't it seem like what's going on for Simpson in Alabama right now, if you've been paying attention at all, is a little bit more of a coronation? Instead of just being announced as a starter, you have to, or maybe instead of a coronation, it's more of like a campaign rollout. It's like, you got to do the campaign announcement, and then you got to like barnstorm and just sort of start building support. It just sort of feels like there's a lot of that around Ty Simpson, Alabama right now. Some of this is the whisper campaign. The people who are lucky enough to be at the Bama practices and scrimmage. Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe how good Ty Simpson looked. there's just a lot of that. Maybe it's true. Alabama often has good quarterback play, but it's just different than the rollout for Gunnar Stockton at Georgia. And if you want to kind of be more, I guess, analytical in the observation, why does an Alabama quarterback get treated differently? Let me give you one stat that I think is kind of interesting. And admittedly, this is more, this is kind of, I guess, sort of pro-Alabama, but it's just, it's a fact, so it's interesting. David Hale, ESPN writer, writes this. This is from 2 days ago. He says, with Ty Simpson and Dylan Lonergan being named quarterback one the past 24 hours, Lonergan's now Boston College. Georgia kind of kicked the tires on him, you'll remember too, the former Brooklyn quarterback. It says, it got me to thinking about Alabama's quarterback recruiting. He says, now listen to this. From 2010 through 2015, the Alabama Crimson Tide signed 6 high school quarterbacks. But those 6 quarterbacks started a total of 2 games for Alabama. A period of time you're bringing in quarterbacks. Those quarterbacks don't necessarily become starters. He says then from 2016 to 23, they signed 11 high school quarterbacks, and they have a combined 217 FPS starts with, already 3 of those quarterbacks now starters here this year. It's 3 first-round draft picks included in that group, plus a second and third rounder, 9 Power 5 starters, and a combined record of 160 and 57. This is, of course, Hurts, Tua, Talia Tungavailoa was also there briefly, Mac Jones, Bryce Young, Jalen Milroe, now Ty Simpson to go along with guys like Lonergan and Holstein, who've also, kind of moved on. So let me tell you why I think this matters. That if you are hearing more confidence coming from Alabama and its new quarterback Ty Simpson compared to what you're maybe hearing about Georgia, some of this is because, as David Hale reports, some of this is because Alabama has just hit on quarterback a lot. And so therefore there is kind of a level of confidence baked in that they're going to maybe hit on Ty Simpson too, because Alabama does have a pretty high batting average of the quarterbacks that it signs in recent years go on to be pretty good. Not all of them for Alabama. Talia Tungavailoa has been good for Maryland, but a capable starter, that's what's happened. Georgia's batting average is not quite as high as Alabama's is. Georgia's batting average is a little bit more consistent with what the rest of college football has been, where you can only play one quarterback at a time. Therefore, you only sort of need one of them to be good. But a lot of players that Georgia brought in as what was sort of supposed to be sort of a truth, sort of a sure thing, have kind of turned out not to be that way. And I'm not picking on guys, but think about even like, say, JT Daniels. Daniels came in as a 5-star transfer, but a couple of years after coming to Georgia, Daniels was like completely out of football, retiring from the game. Brock Vandagriff came into Georgia as a 5-star signee out of high school. After transferring to Georgia to go to Kentucky, Vandagriff also retired from the game. Neither of those guys aspiring to move on and try the NFL. That the batting average for Georgia in terms of quarterbacks who have hit, just not quite as high as the batting average for what Alabama has. We'll see what turns out to be true for Carson Beck. He's obviously at least a starter level player. Of course, he was that for Georgia for 2 years. Now, it doesn't really matter for Georgia because they've had all the quarterbacks they've needed. Stetson Bennett, of course, led them to 2 national championships. But it is not the same batting average. And if you want to look at the overall success for Bama during the Nick Saban era, that was kind of part of it. Is we typically operate on the assumption of about half your elite recruits going to pan out. So therefore, you bring in more than you need, and you'll have hopefully as much as you do need when the basic law of averages plays its way out. The truth is, if you look at how many quarterbacks at Alabama kind of hit above what you would typically expect that index to be, how many 5-star signees hit, once again, sort of over-indexing the expectation. It is a unique aspect of Nick Saban's success that not only did they have a huge number of recruits, the batting average of recruits for Bama that actually panned out, if you look at 5 stars that got drafted, for instance, or quarterbacks that went on to become starters, it is a pretty high batting average overall. You must admit that. Let me shift to this. ESPN, you'll know, has recently gotten into a business agreement with the NFL Network. And this is super complicated because It doesn't include all rights to, say, like the Red Zone channel. They get the linear Red Zone channel on TV. They don't get the digital streaming rights for that, which was certainly initially confusing to me. You have to really kind of dig deep into some of the business reporting on this to sort of see what this does and doesn't include for ESPN and the NFL and the NFL Network. One of the things it does include, though, is that ESPN will now have the rights to the Red Zone channel. That branding, ESPN will now own it, which would give ESPN the opportunity, and this was even explicitly stated when the deal came together, would have the opportunity to do a Red Zone college football if it wanted to. It would have the rights to do that, and it could call it the Red Zone because they now own that branding. Well, you'll know that deep within like the corporate world, and I'm not going to turn this into Bloomberg, but there is a corporate relationship now between Big Fox and Disney. They have, a corporate tie-in. So therefore, there is going to be a bundle available that includes both Fox and ESPN as a future like streaming package, which, if we're being honest, that's just cable. Like, all of a sudden now we're sort of rebuilding cable, but we're doing it in a more complicated way. And it's going to be, y'all, I hate to tell you this, you have no idea how expensive watching football is about to be, but it's about to be even more expensive than it's been before. That's coming. Buckle your seatbelt for it. The point that I'm getting to, though, is that while you do have some sort of corporate tie-in between Big Fox, ESPN, underneath the Disney umbrella, you will not apparently get Fox cooperation with the so-called Red Zone college football channel, we're led to believe. And I do think there's probably more of this coming as there become these sort of twin pillars of media stakeholders within college football. ABC, ESPN on one side, Fox on the other. The comparison I've always made is I grew up during kind of the last golden age of boxing. Boxing still exists. I don't believe it's as popular as it once was. And when I was younger, there were just great fights, kind of a lot. Not as good as there was in the era just before me, but still enough. And you had two sort of twin pillars of the media in that. You had HBO and you had Showtime. And they did not mix streams at all. If you're an HBO fighter, you didn't fight on Showtime. And if you're a Showtime fighter, you didn't fight on HBO. They were just separate identities. They existed in completely different universes for the most part. I do worry there's more of this coming in college football. As Fox and ESPN define themselves more clearly, they just don't cooperate and they don't help each other very much. We have precedent for this, you'll know, in college football. For a long time, say Texas A&M, rivals in different leagues not playing each other. The argument against playing each other always came back to, well, whichever brand felt like it was on top at a given moment. The thought was, why would we help so-and-so? The theory being we help them by playing them. We don't want to do that. To me, that's a template that could exist for a lot less cooperation moving forward between Fox and ESPN, and that would not be a good thing. I was going to do a quick thing on Johnny Manziel. He took a shot at Mississippi State the other day for being not the loudest fans and kind of going into Davis Wade Stadium and sort of shutting that place up. First of all, I would say, why do we got to pick on Mississippi State here? They're already kind of at the bottom of the barrel, for the SEC as it is. Georgia goes to Mississippi State this year. And seeing Johnny Football say what he said, it does kind of make me think that when I went there in 2022, I was a little surprised. As my first time being there, had always heard about, cowbells and all that kind of stuff. In a weird way, the cowbells are not as loud as you think they are. It's really not. And when you watch the games from the stadium, a lot of times on the big video board, they'll tell the fans, put your cowbell down and just yell. Because there's something weird. If you're like next to one cowbell, it's the loudest thing you've ever heard in your life. But somehow 60,000 cowbells at once, it's actually just kind of a dull roar. It's not nearly as loud as actual cheering. So Georgia will experience this in person later on this year. Manziel said what he said. We'll experience that, kind of firsthand. But can we leave Mississippi State alone? They've been through enough. We don't need to be dragging them through the mud at this point in time. I kind of rushed through that a little bit because I want to mention one more thing. And gosh, we are late, as always. This is late breaking coming in just the last couple of minutes. The NCAA has made a pretty significant ruling against Michigan, and I'm just going to read this straight off the screen here. I'm getting this from On3. It says the NCAA has made a ruling on the Michigan sign stealing case. The decision, which was announced on Friday, came following a committee on infractions meeting. According to ESPN's Pete Thamel and Dan Wetzel, Michigan's receiving a significant fine, expected to be more than $20 million. It will stem from the loss of postseason football revenue for the next 2 seasons. So not missing the postseason, just taking some of that postseason revenue. Additionally, ESPN's reported the Wolverines coach Jerome Moore is being given an additional game suspension, which is expected to take place in 2026. The school already proposed a self-imposed 2-game ban for this upcoming season, which is slated for Week 3 and Week 4. It says the decision came after the NCAA's investigation, which began in 2023. So can we just talk about how nonsensical all of this is right now? Michigan clearly cheated. It is being widely acknowledged. This ruling is proof of it. But buried within this, you see how unserious everybody is about doing anything about it. Taking away money. Right now, these Big Ten schools, Michigan included, are made of money. They won't feel that at all, even $20 million. Giving Jerome Moore another suspension. Even this is sort of a Mickey Mouse gesture. He's suspended for 2 games this year, but it's not the big games at the beginning of the season. It's Week 3 and Week 4. And the next suspension doesn't come this season. It comes in 2026. We're going to spread this out to kind of reduce the pain points. This is unfortunately what we see way too much of in life. When you are truly powerful, you never have to admit anything. And this is Big Ten, blue blood Michigan saying, I don't care that we did it. You can't do anything about it. And I think you ought to view that as problematic. And what I never want to hear again, because keep in mind, the Big Ten likes to think of itself as academically superior to the SEC. For a long time, all we heard is, before the Big Ten decided it wanted to try to be competitive in football, is, those rednecks down south, all they do is cheat. How many times have you heard that? Well, here was a moment for the Big Ten as a league in governing Michigan, or Michigan, who certainly thinks of itself as this, Ivy League level public school, to sort of prove that it had some version of the integrity that it wants to hold everybody else to. And it obviously did not do that. Let it be known forever. Michigan cheated its way to a national championship. Some people accuse Ohio State of buying a national championship last year. I told you yesterday, at least a portion of our video audience, I don't necessarily believe that. I really don't. They obviously spent a lot of money. I don't believe they bought their way to a championship. However, I do believe Michigan cheated its way to a national championship. This ruling, even as Mickey Mouse as the punishment's going to prove to be, I think ought to be the ultimate evidence to support that. They got an unfair advantage from knowing information about their opponents that they gained by ill-gotten means. They cheated, and now they're getting away with it, at least for the most part. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And by the way, speaking of our friends at Royal Caribbean, how about a Royal Caribbean-themed golden shoe here today? Our good friend Dina Pruitt, a big part of our audience here, enjoying some time on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship in Alaska. How much do you love to see that? I've never been to Alaska, never taken an Alaskan cruise. I would like to do that at some point in time. It's hard for me to go away from, say, Perfect Day, Coco Cay, and all the great stuff in the Caribbean. I'm just I just think I have, sort of beach vibes in my blood or something. I do love those, Caribbean-themed vacations. I don't know, man. One of these days going to Alaska would probably be pretty fun. Good to see Dina there and her husband having a great time, enjoying that. That's an awesome thing to see, and I really appreciate for all of you who take your Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. Thank you so much for sending us a picture of that. Lousy, stinking Gators. Only thing they're cruising for is cruising for a bruising later on this fall. How about 1,742 days? That's our Gator Hater Updater. You'll have a great weekend. I'll see you tonight, Peachtree Sports Network. Tomorrow, Channel 46, Atlanta News First. High school football is back. Can't wait for it. Back Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews is one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. All right, let's get some YouTube comments, and we'll sort of see how everybody's doing here today. And we'll get ready to bounce out of here after that. On YouTube, let's see what else is going on here. Thomas Tyson says, if y'all have noticed, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, talking about the sort of the veteran presence on the roster. Tony Huff says they should have to vacate the title and all the wins. Yeah, I mean, look, this is just sort of the way that it goes. What was the old line about, being in love means never having to say you're sorry or whatever that is? I mean, the truth is there is a certain level of power that doesn't require you to admit anything. And certainly there's really no accountability for any of this on the part of the media. There just isn't. And for the most part, the media can justify that by saying, well, people don't really care. The season's over with. And that's kind of true. But man, we tried to get a fair hearing on this while it was going on. For instance, who was it that said this, that Tony Huff said they should have to vacate the title and all the wins? What we wanted, because when it's all said and done, I mean, like, think about like great teams in the past that have sort of vacated things. I guess like UNLV basketball and something like that. The truth is we don't really remember, that sort of thing very much. It's sort of an empty thing. What we said is that during the 2023 season, if Florida State, for instance, is going to be judged harshly because they have an injured quarterback or whatever we're told is going on there, or all the stuff that's going on, shouldn't there be some consideration on the part of the committee of, did Michigan cheat its way into the position that it is now? They're having far more success than they previously had as a program. Shouldn't we at least ask the question of, did they cheat to get here? You could have done something about this during the 2023 season, because they definitely cheated and they definitely benefited from it. They haven't been as good since then. They weren't that good before then. They clearly benefited from cheating. That is sort of coded as a low-class opinion, but it doesn't make it any less true. They clearly benefited from cheating, but at the moment that something could have been done about it, nobody wanted to. And that, folks, tells you a lot about what happens behind the scenes in college athletics. I guarantee you, to use a program we just talked about, if some of this was going on at Mississippi State, just by comparison, I guarantee you the situation would have been far different, and everybody knows it. Bo Molinelli says, if you're not cheating, you're not trying, which is fine, right? I mean, I guess, although, whatever. But my only point is that for a lot of us for a very long time, when the SEC was dominating, the Big Ten, couldn't do anything right. At the time, especially people from like Michigan, we're blah, 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 we're so, academically prestigious. We wouldn't, these rednecks down south, all they want to do is cheat. Remember, the Big Ten would like to believe that they would only consider a team for inclusion into the league if it's a part of some, fancy pants union of universities that represents similar values. All of that is a bunch of hogwash. It is all fake. It is all phony. And frankly, the biggest purveyor of that sort of pretentious nonsense is Michigan. And look how they're behaving right now. I don't ever want to hear any of that ever again. It makes me want to vomit. Jonathan Aaron says, I think it's funny that they cheated and still lost to us. Yeah, this came up in the story. What story was this the other day? It wasn't about Georgia, but it came up in the story that Connor Stallions was fighting with some coach. I forget now who it was. And he said that there were like a handful of games that he had every call. Connor Stallions said on X the other day that he had every one of Georgia's calls, had every single one of them. And Georgia blew out Michigan from pillar to post. And Stallion said he had every call, and they still couldn't do anything about Georgia. That's funny. Chris Jacobs says, I can't stand the double standard. They claim the SEC success is only because of cheating, yet their teams have been caught while ignoring all the competitive advantage we have. Yeah, I mean, it's just the height of hypocrisy. And look, there's just a huge portion of the tastemakers around college football that just prefer a team like Michigan being on top more so than what they view as sort of Southern rednecks. They just sort of prefer that. And so the leash will be a little longer for alleged wrongdoing for Michigan because, okay, so here's the Connor Stallions thing. The continuous attempt to correlate signals to any wins and losses at Michigan is funny. This is a quote from Connor Stallions on X. It says that there were 7 games in my time at Michigan where I knew almost every signal of the whole game. 2021 Michigan State, 2022 Michigan State, 2022 Penn State, 2022 Ohio State, 2022 TCU, and 2021 Georgia, as well as Wisconsin. We lost 3 of those games because we didn't tackle well, and Georgia was just historically good. He says we won the other 4 games because we dominated the line of scrimmage and tackled well, blocking, ball security, tackling, run fits, coverage tools. That's football. That's not rocket science. So that's him going back and forth. I think it was Sonny Dykes that he was going back and forth with, the TCU coach. But in the midst of that, he's like, we had every one of Georgia's signals, and we just still couldn't beat them because they were historic. Porter says, do you think Zach Branch is going to have a good season? Yes, I do. I think he's one of Georgia's most important players. There are a couple of guys that have been universally kind of praised around this Georgia calendar year thus far. Branch is clearly one of those. Colby Straughter says, between Michigan and John Mateer, what reason do teams have to follow NCAA rules? Look, the Todd Gurley thing in 2014 happened before DawgNation Daily started. It was the year before we started. When Georgia just, fell prostrate on the floor and just, just absolutely, just collapsed on that Todd Gurley thing. You know how, like, have you ever been so mad you could cry? You know what I'm talking about? Like that thing where I was so mad about Georgia. I would have loved to have been doing, I might would have gotten fired, but I would have loved to be doing DawgNation Daily during the Todd Gurley thing, because we have seen over and over again that the NCAA doesn't really have an enforcement arm. I hate to sound like Andrew Jackson, but the NCAA doesn't really have an enforcement arm. They issue rulings, but much like the Big Lebowski, like, that's just your opinion, man. And your legal opinion, sort of just your opinion. And we see all kinds of instances where a lot of teams have just decided, we're just not that interested in cooperating. We're just not cooperating. Johnny Manziel autographs, Jameis Winston autographs. So somehow, like, Todd Gurley supposedly signed a few autographs, and Georgia's like, yep, you caught us. You caught us. We did it. He did it. It's like there were contemporary examples of, and by the way, this is not lying or anything like that. The American legal system is built on a burden of proof that I don't care if you broke the law, guilty red-handed, it is still the state's job to prove it, right? I mean, there's all kinds of reason for that kind of legal system being the way that it is. It's you may have done it, but you don't have to incriminate yourself. You do not. And I believe that Todd Gurley got bad advice. I do. And I was furious about it. Because you don't have to incriminate yourself. You have a right to remain silent. If you think I signed autographs prove it. And frankly, it's the same thing for John Mateer. If you think I bet on football because of a Venmo transaction that was labeled by him as sports betting, UCLA, USC, pretty specific thing to not be true about. But Mateer has every right to say, if you think I did, have at it, big boy. Prove it. Because that, even though it's not a court of law, that's the sort of basic premise of our legal system. If you think I did it, prove it. And over again, that's what college programs have chosen to do. The NCAA has always been relatively powerless against it. It's one of the reasons why it gives SMU the death penalty or Georgia basketball the punishment when it finds a smaller program that it can sort of bully, because Georgia was just going to give up its basketball program, right? It's like it would have just sort of, I'm talking about going back to the early 2000s. It would have just allowed the NCAA to ransack it. SMU football, nobody that mattered was hurt when SMU was given the death penalty. So the NCAA jumps on that with both feet. UNLV, another example of this. It's kind of gross. It's Las Vegas. It's a little seedy. It felt good to kind of come down on UNLV. But when it's time to go after Michigan football, or think about all the stuff from the FBI essentially caught a few basketball programs a couple of years ago, kind of red-handed, right? And I still don't quite understand why the FBI was so into that. But the FBI caught these teams cheating. These are blue bloods in the basketball realm. NCAA couldn't do anything because the programs that got caught red-handed were like, so prove it, make us. And the NCAA just sort of folded because there's no enforcement arm. The NCAA depends on the institutions to kind of self-enforce the punishments they give out. And if you're Michigan, you're like, we don't care. Then there's nothing the NCAA can do. And so now they'll pay $20 million. They got $20 million in their seat cushions. KC says, listening to all this makes me ask why they took away Reggie Bush's national title. Well, keep in mind, and this is where things get kind of tricky, it was the Heisman Trust that took away Reggie Bush's Heisman Trophy. So that was the decision made by them. And in other words, the NCAA doesn't own the Heisman Trophy, so that couldn't take it. The Heisman owns the Heisman, and so therefore they took it back from Reggie Bush. But didn't they give it back? Didn't that happen? Or did that not happen? I feel like that happened. Blind Squirrel Sports says, I wish LSU played Georgia this season. Be interesting to hear you discuss Dogs versus Tigers with Mr. LSU. Who is that? Who am I missing, Blind Squirrel? Am I missing something on that? Oh, let me get a couple DawgNation chat ones too. In the DawgNation chat, DT says the NCAA was more powerful in the Gurley years. Yeah, I don't think so, though. I mean, couldn't do anything to Johnny Manziel. He sat out like one half. Couldn't do think about, this is within the 4-year span of Cam Newton. Couldn't do anything to him because Auburn didn't cooperate. Sorry, couldn't find anything. We looked into it. We found out we did nothing wrong. And the NCAA is like, okay, well, I guess that settles it. Winston at Florida State, he sat out for a game. He's back in. Maybe that was for something different. Actually, I think him sitting out was for something different. But he had an autograph thing going on for a while too, I think. That the NCAA's enforcement has always been related to the willingness of the institution to cooperate. And if it can find a lesser team to beat up on, of course it's going to jump on it with both feet. There's nothing the NCAA loves more than just absolutely just laying waste to some lesser roguish looking program. They don't have the guts to do anything to a Michigan, and they never really have. Let's see what else. Garrison Tucker on who's to blame specifically. Listen, I'm going to throw blame on everybody. That should not have happened. Todd Gurley should not have lost 4 games that season. He just shouldn't have. Even if he was guilty, which I'm not willing to stipulate that he was, even if he was guilty, he has a right to remain silent. He has a right to remain silent. He has a right to make him prove it. And somebody should have given him independent counsel that what was in Georgia's best interest and what was in Gurley's best interest was not necessarily the same thing. It just wasn't. Georgia sort of benefits from, well, better safe than sorry, Todd's going to sit out 4 games. I don't know that Gurley benefited from that, unfairly tarnishing his reputation, missing, some of the final games of his, or some of the a significant portion of what turned out to be his final year in college. I don't know that he benefited from that. He got injured, remember, when he came back. I don't know that he benefited from that. That in that particular instance, what Georgia's legal counsel was advising it to do and what Gurley's legal counsel should have been advising him to do might very well have been different things. We haven't really had a ton of huge controversies like that in the last 10 years, have we? I mean, I'm sure we've had a few. But we haven't had a ton of that sort of thing. Oh, let's see what else. DT says, what if it was Alabama? Would the penalty be the same? The truth is they're not really coming after Alabama either. They're just not. They'd go after Mississippi State. They'd go after an SEC basketball team, maybe. They certainly would have, 20 years ago. They'll go after – there's a sort of middle tier and below that they'll kind of go after. They hated Bob Huggins. There's a certain sort of rogue actor that everybody sort of feels good if you go after. But even like an Alabama, who's, kind of down south here with us, they're not doing that. And they're probably not going after Georgia football either, to be completely honest with you. They are self-preservationists like all bureaucratic institutions. And so therefore they are not – it's the same thing in Major League Baseball too. I mean, look, the Houston Astros cheated to win a World Series. But given the chance to do something about it, Major League Baseball just didn't want to. And the dirty little secret is that Major League Baseball is not the commissioner. Major League Baseball is the 30 owners, the 29 other owners in this case. The commissioner worked for them. And this is what I think, and boy, you talk about getting out of bounds for our show. I'm not going to do it. But this is the thing that kind of bothers people about life, is that when the other 29 owners had a chance to punish the Houston Astros for getting caught red-handed in the most obvious cheating scandal ever that resulted in a World Series, the other 29 owners just didn't really want to do it because that's their friend. Is it Drayton McClain? Is that the Astros owner? That's their friend. If you throw the book at Houston, that diminishes the value of the franchise. And honestly, there's not an owner in professional sports that cares about anything more than the relative perceived value of his franchise, more so than even winning, far more than winning. I mean, winning's the concern of the peasants. Owners care about their valuation, and they're not reducing the value of the Houston franchise just because they cheated, because in a roundabout way, that's a comp that goes against their own valuation. That was an eye-opening moment for a lot of people. How little some of the stuff behind the scenes is about the winning and the losing. Houston cheated and did not get punished. And there is a lot of that goes on in life. And I will not be explaining myself further. UGA Marine says Gundy said teams should do what they want because NCAA can't do anything to them anyway. Yeah, and look, I want to be you're first of all, you're right, UGA Marine. That certainly sounds like something that Mike Gundy, would say. But I want to be careful though, because while I am really cynical about the kind of uneven enforcement of rules and things like that, you do need rules to have a sport. So when I'm like coming down on what the NCAA has done in the past and what it's incapable of doing right now, I'm actually sort of in favor of a stronger NCAA. Or if you want to call it something new, you can do that. But I'm sort of in favor of a stronger body because I do think you need rules. If you don't have a sport, you don't have rules, right? You can't play a sport. You can't play a game without rules. Rules give shape to the entity. So I do think there needs to be some rules. I think part of the reason why college athletics is sort of in the situation that it's in is because it has been so rudderless because of a lot of the people in charge, like a lot of people that kind of come from that sort of walk of life. They're just sort of phonies. They're just sort of blowhards. It's a lot of, it's a lot of say one thing, do another, unfortunately. Let's see. Garrett Tugger says Gurley needed Saul Goodman. Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, I'm telling you right now, I'm still mad about it today, obviously, because I'm ranting about it for 20 minutes. But I was furious about that at the time. All right. I have not gotten Facebook comments, y'all. I'm sorry. Let me do some Facebook, then we got to go. And I mean, I really got to go after that. On Facebook. If I can get there. I'll go back to YouTube while I'm waiting for this to pull up. Chris Jacobs says it's all meaningless without rules. Yeah, you got to have some rules. And so therefore, I would actually be in favor of, some people are like, they take the cynicism and they're like, we just need to do away with all of this. I think it's actually better to strengthen all of this so that there can be a few rules that matter. I mean, that's what you really need is everything on life is on purpose. Every system accomplishes exactly what it was designed to accomplish. Otherwise, it'd be changed. So when you see this like system producing results that's, for instance, waiting for a long time to get a driver's license, something like that. Like somebody ought to do something about this. If they wanted to, they could. But since they don't, you should assume the system is working the way that it is intended to work. NCAA is sort of the same way. You kind of create this like really ponderous rule book, which means that everybody's guilty of something. And so therefore, if everybody's guilty of something, then the real power kind of lies with who determines what matters and what doesn't. And there is also one of that in life. But that's sort of the issue. So what I would say is if you want to do like actual reform, which, nobody really wants to do, you need a smaller number of rules that are enforced with some real teeth. But I don't know that we're going to get there on that. All right, let's see if I can get some Facebook comments. Yeah, Jonathan Aaron pointing out that the Winston game that he missed against was Clemson, right? That was for a completely different reason. Bo Molinari says, in the case of SMU, it's taken them like 30 years to recover, and they had to still pay their own way to the SEC. Well, the good news is they got to pay their way to the ACC. I mean to say they've got enough money to do that. But yeah, I mean, when you look back on it, and I realized that they were cheating, but Eric Dickerson's driving like a Trans Am or whatever it was. But the point is, the wrong team was winning, and that's when the NCAA always gets involved. Rule book is ponderous. Everybody's guilty of something. But when the wrong team is winning, that is when, typically speaking, things get just a little bit more active. All right, let me see if I can get this Facebook to pull up. And I'm sorry, y'all. I don't know why this is so problematic here today. G. Grace mentioning Brady and Belichick and the stuff involving them. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I would say that's a little bit different than the Astros situation for a lot of reasons, I think. All right. I don't know that Facebook's going to work today, y'all. I'm sorry. I apologize for that, but we'll come back on Monday and try to do more. That's just simply my fault. So I'm sure I'll get ripped over there, and I deserve it because I did not do right by y'all today. I waited too late to get there. Now I can't get it open. So I apologize. But I hope you have a great weekend. And even if you're on Facebook and you're mad that I'm not speaking to you, I hope you'll still check us out tonight, this afternoon, and this evening on Peachtree Sports Network for a great doubleheader from Rome. Cass and LaGrange, Rome and Creekside, then a quartet of games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium tomorrow. Atlanta News first. I'll be lucky enough to have the final 2 of those with my good friend Rusty Manziel. And, of course, thanks to our friends at R.S. Andrews who've been a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down for a very long time. You can find them online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. I was outside a lot yesterday. Very, very hot. That means AC's working really hard right now. So make sure yours is keeping you as cool and comfortable as it needs to be, and it'll keep doing that for the rest of this hot weather season. So get some peace of mind by knowing your AC is tuned back up to factory fresh specs because of our friends at R.S. Andrews. Find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great weekend. We're back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.